Sorry, friends, some kind of technical difficulty there with Amazon. I'll continue at a very important point in the story. Remember, Mr. Longridge was going to write a note to Mrs. Oates, and here's what he said. Dear Mrs. Oates, he wrote, please order some more coffee and replace the canned food I've taken. I will be taking the dogs and Tao too, of course. Here, he came to the end of the small square of paper, and taking another piece, he continued writing. Out for a run before I leave, and will give them something to eat. So don't let our greedy white friend tell you he's starving. Don't worry yourself too much over them. I know they'll all be fine. He wrote the last few words with a smile, for the bull terrier had Mrs. Oates completely enthralled and worked his advantage to the full. He left the pages on the desk under a glass paperweight, then opened the door in answer to a faint scratch. The old dog and the cat bounded in to greet him with their usual affection, bringing the fresh smell of the outdoor air with them. The young dog followed more sedately and stood by, watching aloofly as the other whipped his tail like a lash against the man's legs, while the cat pressed him against him, purring in a deep rumble. But he wagged his tail briefly and politely when the man patted him too. The cat walked into the library to curl up on the warm hearth. Later, when the ashes grew cold, he would move to the top of the radiator, and then, sometime in the middle of the night, he would steal upstairs and curl up beside the old dog. It was useless shutting the bedroom door, or any other doors in the house for that matter, because the cat could open them all, latches or doorknobs, and the only doors that defeated him were those with the porcelain handles, for he found it impossible to get a purchase on the shiny surface with his long monkey-like paws. Pretty amazing what these cats can do. The young dog padded off into his rug on the floor of the little back kitchen. The bull terrier started up the steep stairs and was already curled in his basket in the bedroom when Longridge himself came to bed. He opened one bright slanted eye when he felt the old blanket being dropped over him, and then pushed his head under the cover, awaiting the opportunity he knew would come later. The man lay awake for a while, thinking about the days ahead and of the animals, for the sheer misery in the dog's eyes haunted him. He was going to miss him, he knew. The cat walked into the library and curled up on the warm hearth. Later, when the ashes grew cold, he would move to the top of the radiator. Sorry. They had come to him, this old and lovable trio, over 8 months ago, from the home of an old and dear college friend. His friend, Jim Hunter, was an English professor in a small university about 250 miles away. As the university owned one of the finest reference libraries in the province, Longridge often stayed with him and was, in fact, godfather to Hunter's 9-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. He had been staying with them when the invitation came from an English university asking the professor to deliver a series of lectures, which would involve a stay in England for nearly 9 months. You guys might recall that Mr. T and Mrs. Theriot lived in England back when I was in graduate school years ago. It's a wonderful country. And Professor Hunter had witnessed the tears of his goddaughter and the glum silence of her brother Peter when it was decided that their pets would have to be boarded out and the house rented to the reciprocal visiting professor from England. Longridge was extremely fond of Elizabeth and Peter, and he could understand their feelings, remembering how much the companionship of a cocker spaniel had meant to him, to himself, when he himself was a rather lonely child, and how he had grieved when he had first separated from him. Elizabeth was the self-appointed owner of the cat. She fed and brushed him, took him for walks, and he slept on the foot of her bed. 11-year-old Peter had been inseparable from the bull terrier ever since the small white puppy had arrived on Peter's first birthday. In fact, the boy could not remember a day in his life when Bodger had not been part of it. The young dog belonged, in every sense of the word, heart and soul to their father, who had trained him since puppyhood for hunting. Now that they faced the realization of a long separation, and in the appalled silence that followed the decision, Longridge watched Elizabeth's face screw up in a prelude to tears. Then he heard a voice which he recognized with astonishment to be his very own, telling everybody not to worry at all. He would take care of everything. Were not he and the animals already well known to one another? And had he not plenty of room and a large garden? Mrs. Oates, why, she would be just loved to have them. Everything would be simply wonderful. Before the family sailed to England, they would bring the dogs and the cat over by car, see for themselves where they would sleep, write out a list of instructions, and he personally would love and cherish them until they returned. So, one day the Hunter family had driven over and the pets had been left with many tearful farewells as Elizabeth and last-minute instructions from Peter. During the first few days, Longridge had almost regretted his spontaneous offer. The terrier had languished in his basket, his long arched nose buried in comfort of his paws, and one despairing martyred eye haunting his every moment. And the cat had nearly driven him crazy with his incessant goat-like bleating and yowling of our suffering Siamese cat, a sound I know so well. The young dog had moped by the door and refused all food. But after a few days, won over perhaps by Mrs. Oak's sympathetic clucking and tempting morsels of food, they had seemed to resign themselves, and the cat and the old dog had settled in very comfortably and happily, showing their adopted master a great deal of affection. It was very apparent, however, how much the old dog missed the children. Longridge at first had wondered where he disappeared to some afternoons. He eventually found out that the terrier went to the playground of a little rural school nearby, where he was a favorite among the children, timing his appearance for their recess. Knowing that the road was forbidden to him because of the poor sight and habit of walking stoically in the middle, he had found a shortcut across the intervening fields. But the young dog was very different. He had obviously never stopped pining for his own home and master. And although he ate well and his coat was glossy with health, he never maintained anything like the dignified, uneven distance. The man's respect for this, the man respected him for this, but it worried him that the dog never seemed to relax and always appeared to be listening, longing, and waiting for something far beyond the walls of the house or the fields beyond. Excuse me. Is all I can say about that line. That amused and entertained him more than he would have thought possible over the months. He realized tonight that the parting would be a real wrench. He did not like to think of the too-quiet house that would be his again. He slept at last, and the dreaming, curious moon peeled in at the windows to throw shafts of pale light into the rooms over each of the sleeping occupants. They woke the cat downstairs, who stretched and yawned, then leaped without visible effort onto the windowsill, his gleaming eyes with their slight cast wide open and enormous, and only the tip of his tail twitching as he sat motionless, staring into the garden. You know, one of the things that Burnford does, the author does, is she is fabulous in using descriptive writing. And this sentence right here tells you all about it. How she can, if you close your eyes, you can actually put yourself in the place where she has you, where she has the story set and the setting of the story. So you guys just listen for how her ability to describe the scene that we're hearing about is really special. It's one of the things that makes this story, and many stories like it, classics, is the descriptive writing of the authors. I'll start again at the top of the paragraph. He slept at last. The dreaming, curious moon peeped in at the windows to throw shafts of pale light into the room and over each of the sleeping occupants. They woke the cat downstairs, who stretched and yawned, then leapt without visible effort onto the windowsill, his gleaming eyes, with their slight cast, wide open and enormous, and only the tip of his tail twitching as he sat motionless, staring into the garden. Wow, what a sentence. Presently he turned and with a single graceful bound crossed the desk, but for once he was careless, and his hind leg knocked the glass paperweight to the floor. He shook the offending leg vigorously, scattering the pages of Longridge's note, and sending one page off the desk into the air, where it caught in the upward current of the hot air from the wall heater and sailed across the room to land in the fireplace. Here it slowly curled and browned until nothing remained of the writing but the almost illegible signature at the bottom. When the pale fingers of the moon reached over the young dog in the back kitchen, he stirred in his uneasy sleep and then sat upright, his ears perked, listening and listening for the sound that never came, the high-pitching whistle of his master that would have brought him bounding across the world if only his strained ears could hear it. And lastly, the moon peered into the upstairs bedroom where the man lay sleeping on his sides in the great four-poster bed, and curled against his back, the elderly, comfort-loving white bull terrier slept in blissful, warm comfort. That's the end of chapter 1. And I'll see you guys next time at Montessori Elementary Literature Club. Take care, guys. Mr. T out.